The lesson. No one wanted to teach. The station floated like a lonely star in deep orbit, just another hub in the endless stretch of trade routes and diplomatic crossings. Inside Lecture Hall 7A, Professor Varel adjusted her robe and sighed deeply. Today was the day she had dreaded. For weeks, her xenobiology class had danced around the subject, exploring human culture, history, war strategy, and their baffling entertainment content. But now, inevitably, the students wanted answers to the question that sent chills down many galactic spines. Why is human biology so terrifying? The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss and the usual colorful assortment of students filed in. Feathered, scaled, sleek-furred, glowing-eyed, some with tentacles or fins, others with antennae twitching with nervous anticipation. Virel took a moment to center herself. She had studied human physiology for years, but no preparation, not even her months on Earth, could ever soften the bizarre reality of what humans were. She began with a calm voice. Before we dive in, I must warn you, what you learn today may change how you view Earthborn life permanently. A hush fell. That alone was a feat. No crowd of younglings, especially this mix of excitable species, had ever gone silent that quickly. She turned to the screen and activated the first slide. A blurry video began playing, showing a human soldier running, full speed into battle, wounded, bleeding, but lifting a collapsed shuttle door to drag out his comrades. This is where we begin, she said softly, with strength that should not be possible. The human, despite visible injuries, lifted over 800 units in weight. No exosuit, no enhancements, just adrenaline and sheer desperation. The footage was real, taken during the Kharzan offensive, 10 years ago. Human muscles are not just efficient, she said. They are restrained, built with potential far beyond what's used daily. In emergencies, their brains unlock more, up to 100% in what they call hysterical strength. This is not theory. It is observed fact. Gasps and nervous shifting echoed through the hall. Even the three-mouthed Narek in the back had nothing to say. Virel clicked the next slide. A chart appeared, showing a comparison of thermoregulation across races. Humans are walking furnaces, she continued. They run hot. This burns out most pathogens before they ever take hold. It is one reason they carry so many unique diseases, but rarely fall ill. They are immune to many viruses that devastate entire sectors of our galaxy. Another slide. Data showing the Cathari flu, which had killed 200,000 Jari in 3 days. Humans had been exposed. Barely a fever. And then came the slide that usually provoked audible discomfort. Sleep pheromones. A few students shifted again. They knew what was coming. Humans secrete a compound during rest. We still don't understand its full effects, but this much is clear. It affects different species in very specific ways. She kept her tone academic. No need to stir the class more than necessary. For prey-evolved species, the pheromone registers as a predator's presence. You wake, you flee, you panic. For predator species like the Ymir or the Tevran, you become alert, heightened. Excited, one of the Tevran students quietly clicked his claws together in embarrassment. Virel did not smile. It is not your fault. The human body was not designed for diplomacy. It was designed to survive. A student raised a shimmering hand. A Kalsari, one of the more curious thinkers in the class. But Professor, why are their bodies so inefficient on the surface? They need coats, supplements, sunglasses, oxygen, masks in low pressure. Why would such a fragile race become so dangerous? Virel paused, pleased by the question. Because, she said slowly, their adaptability is their weapon. Click. The screen changed again. Images of human environments, Arctic, desert, oceanic, space, underground, jungle. No other species has adapted so rapidly or so successfully. They die, yes, but then they learn. Then they return stronger. She took a breath, the next segment being the hardest. Now, about reproduction. That woke everyone up. A few furred ears perked up. A row of scaled tails straightened. A bright feathered wing fluttered. Virel pressed a button and dimmed the lights. I will speak plainly. Human mating rituals are not simple. They are invasive, biological, emotional, strategic. Their touches, their voices, even their eyes are tools of persuasion. She turned back to the class. They have no shields, no controlled mating seasons. They pursue connection constantly, through sight, sound, touch, even taste. They weaponize affection. A small screen lit up beside her, a slow-motion clip of a human placing a hand on another's shoulder. It looked innocent, comforting. To you, this means little, she said. To another human, this gesture can trigger entire emotional responses. Trust, intimacy, even arousal. They evolved with skin that reads intention and gives intention. They touch more than any race we've observed. She shut the video off and turned the lights back on. So yes, she concluded, the galaxy fears human biology, not because they are the strongest or the smartest, but because they never stop adapting, because they turn survival into instinct, and instinct into art. The silence in the room was deafening. Some students took deep breaths. Others stared, wide-eyed. Only one dared to speak. So, is that why the Ymir ambassador married one? Virel smiled for the first time. Among many reasons, yes. Now, let's break for 10. We'll continue with human hormonal responses next. The classroom buzzed back to life, but the awe remained. As Virel sipped her cooling tea, she knew today's lesson would be remembered for years. Not because of scandal, but because the galaxy was starting to understand. What makes humans dangerous isn't just what they are, it's what they're capable of becoming. They adapt, therefore they conquer, Professor. Virel had barely returned to her desk when the classroom was already abuzz again. Not with noise, but with thought. Some students whispered to each other, others simply stared down at their notes, dazed by what they had just learned. Virel, meanwhile, flicked her long fingers across her datapad, queuing up the next segment. This wasn't just a lesson anymore. It was a revelation unfolding in real time. She returned to the center of the room, the gravity slightly lighter, in the classroom than on Earth, but still enough to keep her movements grounded. As the ambient lights dimmed slightly, she spoke again, softer this time, as if explaining a dangerous species to children who had just learned they might be sleeping. Beside one, we've discussed their strength, their pheromones, their touch, but we haven't yet addressed their most dangerous trait, resilience. She tapped the screen again, revealing a new image. It wasn't a battlefield, or a gym, or even a laboratory. It was a hospital. On the screen, a human lay in a bed, tubes inserted, wounds fresh, bones visibly reconstructed with metal plates. A chart beside the image noted that the subject had been in a hovercar collision, suffered 12 fractures, internal bleeding, and had been clinically dead for 3 minutes. He woke up 3 days later, she said. Gasps again, but quieter this time, as if even disbelief was scared to be loud. Human biology is not just robust in the moment, it recovers, faster and deeper than we can predict. Their cells regenerate under stress. Scar tissue forms faster, bone regrows faster, and their pain tolerance. She paused, glancing around the room. They can endure levels that would send most species into trauma shock. They have an entire cultural trope called walking it off. She couldn't help the small dry smile. Imagine being shot in the leg and continuing to charge forward because that's just what your species believes you should do. The screen flipped again. This time, a series of medical scans comparing various species' pain responses. The human image glowed red, pain thresholds off the chart. They don't stop because it hurts. They stop when the job is done. Virel tapped again. Now came a different slide. Human childhood. A young girl, skin scraped, knees muddy, smiling despite a clear wound on her arm. Behind her, other children climbed over rocks, jumped from ledges, ran wild in what seemed like unstructured chaos. This is their training ground, Virel said softly. From the moment they are born, they are exposed to danger. Not intentionally, but systemically. Gravity, weather, sharp objects, wild animals, disease, all part of Earth's design. And yet, humans treat these risks as rites of passage. Hand slowly rose in the back, the Tevrin this time. How can such a dangerous upbringing not traumatize them? Varel considered her answer. It does, she said truthfully. But they transform trauma into tenacity. There is a phrase on Earth, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. For humans, it's not just philosophy, it's biology. Their cortisol levels, their neurological structures, everything reinforces a system where hardship strengthens rather than weakens. Another slide came up, one showing Earth's environmental diversity, blistering deserts, Arctic tundras, rainforests, urban cities, oceans deep and dark. No other race we know of lives across so many extreme environments. On their home planet, Virel said, we believe this is what forced humans to become what they are, survivors of chaos, children of contradiction. The class was still, not bored, not restless, just spellbound. You must understand, humans are not the best at any one thing. There are races faster, stronger, smarter, but humans are the best at surviving the worst. She stepped closer to the front rows now, the students craning forward as if every word unlocked a new mystery. Now let's discuss something else. Their ingenuity. Click. A montage of inventions played, from the wheel to fire to satellites and deep space drives. But what shocked the class most were the smaller, overlooked technologies. Eyeglasses, duct tape, coffee makers, umbrellas, paper clips. They create solutions where none existed. Not because of superior intellect, but because of necessity. They solve problems faster than any known species. And when their tools break, they improvise. She paused, letting that sink in. Then she gave a short nod and added, that's how they survived in the Carthan void. There was a low murmur. Even the younger students had heard that name. The screen changed again. This time, a grainy footage, declassified after years of debate. A crew of human engineers stranded in the Carthan void, an uninhabitable pocket of collapsing physics after their jump drive exploded. They had no functioning systems, oxygen dwindling, radiation rising, communications dead. She held her breath, letting the silence build. They survived 11 days by converting their waste recycler into a life support loop. They used torn emergency blankets to refract solar particles and rebuilt a rudimentary transmitter using parts from their food dispensers. The class stared in stunned silence. That kind of thinking doesn't come from intelligence alone, it comes from desperation. And desperation, when mixed with curiosity, is humanity's most powerful trait. The next slide showed the recovered humans, sunburnt, tired, smiling at the rescue crew. They survived because they refused not to. Someone finally whispered, monsters. Varel looked up sharply. No, not monsters. Mirrors. That caught them off guard. Because humans show us what we could be, what we fear to be, what we wish we were. Resilient, inventive, tireless, alive. She powered down the screen, letting only the ambient light glow above them. There's a reason alien scientists don't just study humans. They fear them, not because they are cruel, not because they dominate, but because nothing breaks them for long. A chime rang out through the intercom, signaling the halfway point of the class session. Take a short break, she said. Stretch. Breathe. You'll need it for the next topic. As the students stood, muttering in low voices, Virel leaned against her desk, sipping her tea again. There was still more to teach. Much more. About their sleep habits, their emotions, their terrifying empathy. But for now, she let the silence sit, because silence meant awe, and awe, for once, meant understanding. The secrets. Within the silence. When the break ended and the students shuffled back into their seats, the mood had shifted. The earlier curiosity had matured into something heavier, more thoughtful. It wasn't just the revelations that weighed on them. It was the dawning understanding that Earth's native species, despite all odds, had clawed its way into dominance through a blend of chaos, madness, and brilliance. Professor Varel stood quietly by the display board, waiting. She didn't have to command silence. She already had it. "We've spoken of strength," she began softly. "We've explored their resilience, their adaptation, and their creative fury. But there is one aspect that even the greatest minds in the Confederation still cannot define." She stepped forward, eyes sweeping the room. "Emotion." She said the word as if unveiling a sacred relic. Click. The screen lit up with images, some of joy, others of despair. A soldier hugging his wounded friend, a mother weeping beside a crib, a couple dancing in the rain, a lone child smiling while feeding a stray dog. Emotion in humans is not a byproduct. It is not a simple neural response. It is foundational to everything they do. The class leaned in. The Jinn scholar tilted her mask forward to hear better. Even the Karen with slow processing neurons shifted forward with creaking anticipation. "They do not just feel," Varel continued. "They act upon feeling. They build empires out of love. They destroy worlds out of grief. Every significant event in their history is tied to emotion, never logic alone." Another slide. Earth's major wars, revolutions, civil movements. The faces of crowds in protest, tears, screams, joy, rage. Most races rely on logic, strategy, or instinct, but humans will willingly march into certain death for a belief, for an idea. They sacrifice themselves for strangers. They risk everything for symbols, songs, and even flags, not because they're programmed to, but because they choose to. The screen changed again, this time showing what looked like a hospital ward, except it was on a space station. "These are human medics," she said. "Volunteers during the Zell plague. No immunity, no guarantee of survival. They chose to go in anyway." The silence was thick again. "A quarter of them died," she added. "But the other 3/4 saved over 9,000 lives, including Confederation children." One of the Point twins raised a cautious hand. "But that makes them noble, doesn't it? Not terrifying?" Varel nodded slowly. "Nobility and terror are not opposites, Cadiel. Sometimes they're twins." A moment passed, then another, and finally she moved on. "Let's discuss their brains." Click, charts and scans flooded the screen. Complex neural maps, densely, interwoven sections glowing with activity. Humans don't just think, they imagine. Their brains are uniquely structured to simulate reality, to create hypotheticals. They can picture impossible futures, then spend their lives building them into existence. She paused. "This is their most dangerous ability." More than a few students blinked at that. Imagine a species that can plan generations ahead, that can invent threats before they happen, that can imagine itself extinct, and then build technologies to prevent it. The screen flipped to a history of inventions again, but this time highlighting theoretical fields: quantum manipulation, artificial intelligence, terraforming, cryogenic sleep. They dream before they build. They fear before danger arrives. Their thoughts exist in past, present, and future simultaneously. She let the idea settle like dust on stone. Their fears build their cities. Their dreams guide their weapons. Their imaginations shape their morals. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled a book from her bag. "This," she said, "is a fictional story. It is not real. It never happened. And yet millions of humans cried reading it. Why? Because it taught them something real about themselves." She held it up so everyone could see the title. "To Kill a Mockingbird. Only humans create morality through make-believe," she whispered. A Urel in the second row shivered. "That's unnatural." "No," Varel corrected. "That's uniquely human." The room was still. Even the background hum of the filtration system seemed to fade into reverent quiet. "Let me show you one more thing." Click. A dark, low-resolution image appeared. A single human astronaut sitting alone on a distant exoplanet, staring at a green sky. The text at the bottom indicated it was footage from a deep-range exploration mission, long classified. This human volunteered for a one-way mission. No return. No rescue. Just data collection and survival for as long as possible. They brought books, music, a chessboard, and left behind poems scratched into metal walls. A murmur. Why would they do that? A student asked. Why choose exile? To understand, Varel said. To feel wonder. To be the first. Another hand rose, hesitant. This one from a feathery opticon. Do they not fear solitude? Varel shook her head slowly. They fear it deeply, and that's why they face it. She stepped back from the screen, which brings me to my final point today, and perhaps the most difficult. She let that linger, then added in a near whisper, humans love like they breathe, involuntarily, constantly, fiercely. The images on the screen changed again. Families, couples, friendships, bonds forged in war and rebuilt after it. No species loves the way humans do. They form deep connections quickly. They love flawed people. They forgive betrayal. They risk everything again and again to protect those they love. And when they lose someone, she tapped again. The screen showed memorials, gravestones, names etched into monuments. They carry that love forever. The bell rang. Class dismissed. But no one moved. Varel sighed and gave them a small smile. This is why we study them, not just to understand the threat, but to understand ourselves. She turned to gather her things but paused when she felt a presence behind her. One of her students, silent, respectful. Professor. The young Tevrin whispered. Do you think they know what they are? Varel stopped, considered, then quietly replied, No, I think that's what makes them beautiful. The paradox of fragile invincibility. Professor Varel's office was dim, lit only by the glowing rim of a simulation globe floating beside her desk. She stared at it in silence, its projection casting a slow-turning hologram of Earth, blue oceans, green land masses swirling white clouds. It was peaceful, beautiful, deceptively simple. But as Varel knew, and had just spent the better part of her lecture revealing, there was nothing simple about humanity. Not their biology, not their minds, and certainly not their presence in the stars. A knock pulled her from her thoughts. Enter, she said without turning. The door slid open with a faint hiss, and in walked Administrator Halvran, a lean-pointed being of the Vurithan species. His skin was a translucent lavender and shimmered faintly in the artificial lighting. He carried a datapad and a neutral expression, but the tightness in his posture betrayed unease. I heard your lesson today shook the younger species, he said dryly. Varel allowed herself a small chuckle. Good. It was meant to. Halvran stepped further inside, casting a wary glance at the Earth hologram. You told them about the emotional damage? I told them everything they needed to know. She turned to face him. Especially that. He lowered his voice. There are rumors, Varel, that your curriculum borders on reverence. That, her eyes hardened. If reverence is another word for acknowledging truth, then yes, I revere it. Halvran shifted uncomfortably. You know the Council doesn't like it when we elevate a species that still uses metal projectiles to settle disputes. And yet that same species, she said coldly, built a Dyson sphere prototype around a dwarf star, with scraps, just because they were curious. She tapped her palm, summoning an image of that very project, a dark skeletal ring structure glowing with harvested energy. Earth's contribution to science was undeniable, even if their methods remained primitive in appearance. They create tools of war and hope with the same hands, she added. You should fear the day they decide those two are one and the same. Halvran remained silent. Then, carefully, he placed his datapad on her desk and slid it toward her. I came to warn you, there's talk of restricting access to certain human archives. Too many of our students are influenced. Varel didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked back at the hologram of Earth. They're not just influencing the youth. They're inspiring them, changing them. The administrator tilted his head. You say that like it's a good thing. It is, she said simply. Elsewhere on the station, a very different kind of lesson was underway. In the gravity gym of Section 9, a group of young recruits were gathered around a sparring ring, their eyes glued to the pair in the center. One of them was human. Not large, not armored, not aggressive, just average if not lean. His name was Corporal Mace Holt. Brown eyes, black hair, calloused palms. Nothing about him stood out. Until he moved. His opponent was a male Tharnak, twice Mace's size with quadruple-jointed limbs and muscle densities that could crush steel. The bout had been expected to last 30 seconds. It was entering its 4th minute. Mace ducked, weaved, turned, and flipped with precise movements honed by instinct and necessity. He wasn't faster, he wasn't stronger, but he was unpredictable. His footwork told no story. His rhythm betrayed no pattern. He slipped past another strike, dropped low, and flipped the Tharnak onto its back using a leverage point no one else had seen. The watching cadets exploded in shocked cries. The Tharnak groaned on the mat, stunned and winded. Mace simply offered a hand. You okay? The Tharnak stared at him, panting. How? How did you do that? Mace just smiled and tapped his temple. Trial and error, my dude. That was round 33 for me today. Gotta get it wrong a lot before I get it right. He helped the Tharnak up and turned to the class. That's how humans work. We're not the best at anything. We just refuse to stay bad at it. A hush followed. Then the instructor, a Ketran with fur like liquid steel, stepped forward and clapped twice. That, she said with a rare nod of approval, was textbook human defiance. Learn from it. Meanwhile, in the lower decks of the station, 2 engineers, a tall Mardican with amphibious traits and a short, scrappy woman from Montana named Jules, were locked in what could only be described as a welding emergency. A pressure valve had ruptured. Cooling lines were overloading. The Mardican panicked, typing into a control panel with shaky fingers. But Jules didn't wait. She kicked open a fuse box, ripped out 2 wires, twisted them together, and shoved a copper wrench into the circuit to ground it. Sparks flew. The overload stopped. Are you crazy? The Mardican screeched, blinking his triple eyelids. She grinned. A little. He stared at the mess. That's not regulation. She wiped her forehead with a gloved hand. Neither was the leak. Welcome to human engineering, darling. If it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. Later that night, a report reached Professor Varel's inbox. 3 incidents, small, isolated, but all showcasing the same thing. Humans adapting, improvising, connecting. She read each one quietly, sipping her tea. Then she pulled up an old document from Earth's history. It was a quote. One she often thought about when dealing with skeptics like Halvrin. It read, "We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard." John F. Kennedy. A smile tugged at her lips. Yes. That was humanity in one line. They did not pursue comfort. They pursued the impossible, not for profit, not for conquest, but for the sheer joy of proving it could be done. And no matter how much fear the galaxy tried to hide behind its politics and regulations, the truth remained. The galaxy wasn't afraid of what humans had done. It was afraid of what they hadn't done yet. The empathy code aboard the observation wing of Station Aurelius, the glass dome shimmered under the glow of a distant binary star. The class had returned, not just Varel's students this time, but others as well. Word of her lecture series had spread. It was no longer a required course, it had become an event. As Professor Varel entered the dome with her usual slow, measured steps, the murmurs died away. Her reputation had transformed her into something of a legend. And tonight she wasn't here to teach biology. She was here to talk about the unknown. Today, she began, hands clasped behind her back, We're not speaking about muscles, or bones, or adrenaline. Today we speak of something we can't scan, we can't measure, we can't even explain with science. She paused, letting her words settle. Today we speak of human empathy. On cue, the lights dimmed and a massive curved display flickered to life. It showed two ships. One, human, one Varrock, adrift in space after a battle. The human vessel had already broadcast a mayday. The Varrock ship had not. The students watched in silence as the human ship rerouted its remaining energy. Not to save itself, but to tractor in the damaged Varrock ship and stabilize it. In doing so, the human crew sacrificed their own backup oxygen supply. They made it out alive. Barely. But the Varrock survivors made it too. Explain this, Virel said to the class. Logically, tactically, mathematically. No one did. She turned from the screen. This wasn't a peace treaty. These two species had been in hostile negotiations for 6 months, and yet, the humans chose mercy. A feathered opticon raised, a talon. Wouldn't they gain something? A political advantage? Virel's voice was calm. No. In fact, they lost standing in their own military courts for delaying their mission. Another student asked quietly, Then why? Virel smiled, softly, because someone on board couldn't bear the thought of people dying within reach of help. And that was enough. She tapped the console. A new story appeared. This time, it was Earth itself. Footage from a natural disaster. Buildings collapsed, fires, chaos, and through the smoke, humans pulling each other from rubble, strangers holding hands, children passed down human chains to safety, citizens forming human walls against floodwaters. These are not soldiers. These are shopkeepers, librarians, mechanics, people who had no training, but they rushed toward danger because someone needed them. She faced the class again. This is what makes them unstoppable. Not just strength, not just endurance, but this unbearable, compulsive need to help, to care, even when it costs them everything. A Corinne, slow and thoughtful, raised a scaled hand. But wouldn't that make them easier to manipulate? Many have tried, Virel replied. Empathy, however, isn't weakness, it is unpredictability. Because where logic hesitates, empathy acts, often irrationally, often powerfully. The next segment showed footage from the Karzon Rebellion, specifically the ceasefire moment, where a single human medic walked into the line of fire, unarmed, to retrieve an injured child from no man's land. A sniper could have ended her life in seconds. No one fired, and after the child was saved, the firing stopped. For good. She said she didn't care who the child belonged to, Virel murmured. Only that he was in pain. A student from the point species whispered, That doesn't make sense. No, Virel said. It doesn't. That's the point. There was a long pause. She continued more softly now. They build communities faster than any species we've seen. They grieve in groups. They heal each other with presence alone. Where other races see division, they invent common ground. And when they love, oh, when they love. She turned to the display again. This time, it showed a long-distance marriage between a human and a jinn, separated across 2 systems. Every week, without fail, the human partner sent video messages, songs, stories, hand-drawn pictures, not for politics, not for gain, for love. It isn't just romantic, she said. It's platonic, familial, communal. They attach deeply, and that connection gives them a drive we can't replicate. Then her tone darkened almost imperceptibly. But that connection also gives rise to something else. She tapped the pad. The display showed the aftermath of the fall of Saru, a colony wiped out in a brutal pirate raid. The footage wasn't of the destruction. It was of the human response. Rescue ships arriving faster than expected. Aid workers staying beyond orders. Survivors refusing evacuation until every last injured civilian was pulled from debris. And then, retaliation. The pirates were tracked, not by military means, by volunteer networks, civilians, hackers, traitors. When the military finally engaged, The pirate fleet had already been crippled by dozens of ambushes organized entirely by humans operating outside of official command. They don't forget pain, Varel said. Not when it's theirs. Not when it's someone else's. And they don't accept injustice quietly. A quiet student, a small, furred Thalen, asked in a tremble, "Is that why they make such terrifying enemies?" Varel looked at her, then nodded. Yes, because a human doesn't fight only to win. They fight to protect. And when someone they love is harmed, that becomes their purpose. The screen now showed something simple, a child hugging an injured soldier on a hospital bed. No data model accounts for love as a combat variable. But it should. She let that statement sit in the silence. Because when humans love, they build civilizations. And when that love is betrayed, they burn down empires. The contagion of humanity. The council chamber on Station Oralis was always cold, physically and politically. The sweeping hall, with its vast metal columns and panoramic view of nearby moons, was meant to inspire reverence and remind every species seated there that they were just one star in a sky full of others. But on this particular evening, something else hovered in the air. Not reverence, not fear, controversy. The debate was reaching its peak. The holographic display in the center rotated slowly, projecting the unmistakable outline of Earth. Blue, vibrant, untamed, and surrounding it, dozens of security incident reports, educational reform logs, and migration charts showing a troubling pattern. One of the counselors, a sleek, ice-boned UN named Sherelle, stood to speak. We have allowed them too much freedom. Their influence spreads like radiation, subtle at first but inescapable. Our own citizens mimic them. Our youth quote them. Our language shifts. Our diplomacy softens. They are unbalancing the galaxy. A chorus of low agreement rippled through the chamber, and then a lone voice. You speak of influence, Varel said from her observer's podium, her tone even. I speak of evolution. All eyes turned to her. Your fear is not of humans, she continued. It is of change, because for the first time, we are not the center of our own future. We are responding to someone else's light. Sherelle scoffed. You make them sound like gods. No, Varel said calmly. I make them sound like mirrors. She gestured to the display. These reports, these shifts in culture, you act as though they're accidents, but look closer. Our species are not being infected. We're waking up. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the delegates. When was the last time your people rallied to aid a neighbor colony without being ordered? When did our youth last risk their own lives to help strangers in a transport crash? These changes began after Earth entered the galactic fold, and they are not weaknesses, they are reminders. Sherelle narrowed his crystalline eyes. Reminders of what? Varel smiled. That we are more than logic. That we are still capable of compassion, of curiosity, of wonder. The room was silent. Then she added softly, and that we are not finished growing. Far from the council chambers in a colony hospital nestled inside the rocky cliffs of Ravenor, a young Jarl nurse sat at the bedside of a wounded miner, a human named Eli. His breathing was shallow, and the plasma burns across his torso were still healing. The nurse adjusted the coolant bandages carefully, her hands trembling. She'd been trained by her own kind. Her techniques were precise, but none of her mentors had prepared her for humans. They were too unpredictable. Earlier, when Eli's pain spiked, she had offered silence. That was the Urel way. Let the body suffer alone so the mind could remain proud. But Eli had laughed. You don't gotta be quiet, he'd whispered through gritted teeth. Tell me something. A story? Anything. You got a favorite food? And she had stared at him, confused. You are in pain, you should rest. That's why I want to talk, he said, blinking slowly. Helps, makes it human. So she told him about a soup from her homeworld, made with ground sapphire root and river moss. He made a face, joking it sounded like swamp water. And she, without realizing it, had laughed. Now 3 days later, she found herself humming softly as she changed his dressings. Something earth-based, a tune she had heard on the shared audio system of the outpost. It had no words, but it carried warmth. She hadn't noticed the station chief watching from the doorway. Later, the chief would ask her, "Why do you care so much? He's not one of us." And she would answer with something she hadn't even known was forming inside her. "Because now I understand how he can care so easily. It's not that he's human. It's that I can be too." Across the station, in a modest diplomatic lounge, 2 young cadets, one Jin and one Karen, sat sharing contraband earth snacks and watching a human comedy show. They didn't understand all the jokes, but they laughed anyway. "I don't get it," the Karen admitted between giggles. "Why is it funny when the man walks into a glass door?" "Because it's stupid," the Jin replied, clutching his stomach. "And they celebrate stupid. Humans don't hide their flaws, they share them." The Karen nodded slowly, looking thoughtful. "We spend our lives hiding mistakes. They make entertainment out of it." A pause. "Maybe that's why they're not afraid to fail." On the edge of the station, in a maintenance tunnel barely wide enough for 2, a young maintenance drone operator named Kess, a member of the insectoid Frit species, sat in silence with an old human engineer named Carl. They'd been down there 3 hours, 1 broken water recycler, 1 dropped hydro cable, and 2 jammed gear couplings. Kess had been about to give up. Her mandibles clicked in frustration. "It is not worth it. We will wait for a replacement unit. This one is beyond recovery." Carl lit a small lamp, squinting at the device. "Nah, look at this." He pointed. "This isn't broken, it's just out of place. Probably shook loose in the last gravity shift." He reached in, twisted something, and with a hiss, the unit rebooted. Kess was speechless. "How did you—" she began. Carl wiped his hands. "Same way I always do. I don't give up till I run out of breath." Kess stared at him. "That is inefficient." Carl winked. "So's falling in love, so's raising kids, so's fixing things that break down every month, but we do it anyway because it matters." Kess tilted her head. "Even if it fails again?" "Especially then," Carl said. And Kess, for the first time in her memory, felt something flicker. Behind her compound eyes, hope. Back in her quarters, Varel recorded her daily log. "They call it contagion," she said softly, her voice low, "but what I see is conversion." Her eyes scanned the night side of Earth on the projected globe beside her. The planet pulsed gently with life. We brought them into our galaxy expecting chaos. We feared their aggression, their wildness, their unpredictability. But what we received was a reminder of what it means to care, to risk, to wonder, to be more than safe, to be alive. She leaned forward, her hand hovering over the record control. "They are not just reshaping our policies, they are reshaping our souls." She stopped the recording, and for the first time in years, she wept, not in sorrow, not in fear, but in gratitude.